The sun rose very slowly for us every morning. I want you to just take a second and let those words really sink in. Those are the actual words spoken by a young girl rescued from a nightmare that ultimately horrified an entire nation. Today, we're looking at a deeply harrowing explainer of a very sensitive story. It's a topic that demands our utmost respect because understanding what happened here means understanding a catastrophic failure in the very systems we built to keep children safe.
So, let's get right into it. Today we are unpacking Betrayal of Innocence, the Muzaffarpur Shelter Home Case. We're going to look methodically at how a state-funded institution, a place meant to be a literal safe haven, somehow became a site of systemic abuse. We'll examine how the exact people tasked with protecting the most vulnerable girls in Bihar, India, became their predators. Using documented reports and the ultimate legal outcomes, we're going to reconstruct exactly how this happened. Section 1. A historic legal verdict.
To really grasp the gravity of this case, we have to start with a number, 19. After years of agonizing legal proceedings, an Indian court handed down a massive, historic ruling. Out of the 20 individuals officially charged in this sweeping criminal conspiracy, 19 of them were found guilty of physical and sexual assault. The scale of that accountability is honestly staggering. It's incredibly rare to see nearly an entire roster of accused individuals brought to justice in such a comprehensive, definitive way.
But who exactly were these 19 people? Well, they didn't just include the men from the outside who committed the assaults. It included the aunties. These were the female caregivers actually employed by the shelter. So the crucial takeaway here is that the very women hired to nurture, feed, and protect these girls were convicted of enabling the abuse. They were the gatekeepers facilitating the nightmare. It is just an absolute betrayal when the protectors are actively participating in the crimes.
Let's move to Section 2. Uncovering the nightmare. Now, if the staff was in on it, you're probably wondering how anyone even found out. Well, the catalyst was the TIS report. In 2018, the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, which is a highly respected institution, was tasked with doing an independent, systemic audit of 110 different shelter homes across the state of Bihar. It was this independent, outside scrutiny, applying rigorous social science methods to government-funded institutions that ultimately shattered the facade and exposed what was going on behind those locked doors.
And this comparison brutally illustrates the massive gap between expectation and reality. On paper, the government intent was safe, care, and protection for vulnerable children. But the actual TIS findings exposed the reality at Muzaffarpur. Young girls kept in locked, windowless rooms, completely isolated and subjected to systemic drugging and severe abuse. It was a complete, literal inversion of everything a shelter is mandated to be. The audit led to immediate police investigations, and medical examinations revealed a devastating truth. 34. Out of the 42 girls living at the Muzaffarpur Shelter Home, tests conclusively confirmed that 34 of them had been sexually assaulted. This wasn't some isolated incident slipping through the cracks. This was an industrial-scale operation of abuse, targeting almost every single resident in that building.
To impartially understand the systemic horrors these girls endured, we need to look at what investigators actually found. They discovered that the girls were routinely drugged with sleeping pills, waking up in pain while caregivers literally mocked them. Those same aunties facilitated the entry of outsiders into the girls' rooms at night. The psychological toll was so severe that dozens of self-inflicted injuries were documented on the victims. And despite receiving state funding meant for their health and nutrition, many of the girls were left suffering from tuberculosis and severe skin diseases.
Section 3. The Architect of Abuse. So how does a sprawling operation like this run unnoticed for so long? For that, we have to look at the top of the chain of command, a man named Thakur. Breaking down his resume, you can clearly see how he engineered this. He wasn't just the owner of the shelter home. He owned an influential local newspaper. He sat on a panel responsible for accrediting other journalists. And he was the head of the state-funded nonprofit running the shelter. He essentially used his high-level political connections and immense media influence to build a fortress around his criminal activities, completely silencing any potential whistleblowers. And his motivations weren't just predatory. They were deeply financial. Thakur's nonprofit was siphoning over 4 million rupees annually from the state. That is a massive amount of government funding, money that was explicitly earmarked to feed, clothe, and medically treat those children. But as we saw from the girls' severe health conditions, that money clearly never reached them.
Section 4. India's Child Safety Crisis.
As horrifying as the Muzaffarpur case is, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. If we look at this timeline, back in 2012, India passed the POCSO Act, the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. This was a major piece of legislation designed specifically to strictly combat these crimes. Since its passing, reported cases have actually nearly doubled, which shows victims are coming forward. Then we see the 2018 TIS audit exposing Muzaffarpur, and finally the January 28th sentencing date for the 19 convicted individuals. This whole timeline illustrates the massive, ongoing struggle between passing protective laws on paper and actually achieving tangible justice in the real world.
Because the truth is, justice remains incredibly hard to come by. That is why the Muzaffarpur verdict is so rare. While experts note that better laws and media coverage mean way more cases are being reported today, the actual conviction rate remains stagnant. As you can see, only 28% of reported cases result in a conviction, leaving a massive 72% unconvicted. The system is catching more reports, but the judicial follow-through is heavily bottlenecked. Which brings us right to the core of this legal struggle. You see, the POCO Act technically mandates that child abuse trials must be completed within 1 single year to ensure swift justice for traumatized victims. However, the systemic reality? It's agonizingly slow. Because of backlogged courts and procedural delays, victims find themselves waiting years, just as the survivors of Muzaffarpur did, for any kind of legal resolution.
Finally, Section 5. The path forward. So what happens after a nation is confronted with a system of such profound darkness? Well, the Muzaffarpur case acted as a massive, nationwide wake-up call. The public outcry was so intense that it directly influenced national policy. One of the major legislative impacts following this case was the introduction of the death penalty for the rape of children under the age of 12. The state essentially responded to this extreme breach of trust by implementing the absolute most extreme legal consequences possible for child predators.
The conviction of those 19 individuals marks a vital, hard-fought chapter of justice for the survivors of this tragedy. But vigilance is a shared responsibility. If you or someone you know needs help, please do reach out to the Child Protection Services helpline. Ultimately, this case leaves us with a critical, provocative question that we all have to grapple with. Beyond the laws written on paper, who is truly watching the institutions designed to protect the most vulnerable among us? Thank you for taking the time to learn about this deeply important topic today. Take care and stay informed.